Tune Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @TuneReview, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@tunereview.com, that is INFORMATION@CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976, that's 0141 772 3976.
This is from The National of Friday, the 8th of November 2024, from the politics section. Donald Trump does not deserve John Swinney's welcome. This article is by Patrick Harvey. Donald Trump's proclaimed love of Scotland has always been something of an embarrassment to people all across our country. But the reality is that as dangerous as the president-elect is, we are not immune to him or the toxic politics that he stands for. From emboldening Nazis and white supremacists to whipping up fears and tensions around the world and undermining democracy in his own country, his first presidential term did so much to shape our current political context. It is easy to see why another term of Trump in the White House is such a frightening prospect for so many. That is why many of us strongly object to what would be unremarkable in other circumstances, the welcoming overtures that he has received from other leaders around the world, including Scotland's First Minister. The election outcome may be legitimate, but his politics are so toxic that it's neither possible nor desirable to have a normal relationship with a president who does not respect basic civilized norms. A convicted felon who believes in erasing fundamental human rights for many of the most marginalized people in society, a misogynist whose aggressively anti-choice views have resulted in the appointment of extremist Supreme Court judges and a crackdown on long-held rights. The clearly political choice to overturn Roe versus Wade has decimated reproductive rights in some states, with the president-elect promising to double down on these punishing policies. The climate crisis is a global one, and at a time when we urgently need global action, the most powerful office in the world will be held by a climate change denier, who's dismantled nearly 100 environmental protections during his last term. Nobody believes for a moment that he will change. He will allow the biggest global polluters to carry on destroying our planet in the name of profit. It is easy to see why so many Americans wanted change, from the skyrocketing cost of living to the utterly shameful role of the Biden administration in enabling genocide against the people of Gaza. It is no surprise that so many were sick of a broken status quo. But the cost of a Trump presidency will not be felt by the rich and powerful, or by the corporations who have made so much from exploiting people and planet. Instead, it will be felt by the marginalized communities who have been thrust into the forefront of the cynical culture war that has been fueled by Trump and demagogues like him. So, if this country does have a special relationship with the US, it must be focused on them, the people and communities who we need to stand with and support, not the man who poses such a threat to their lives and their well-being. Our allies in the US must be those who still believe in human rights, in democracy and the rule of law, and in climate action. That's why John Swinney's warm words were so disappointing to those of us who know that our social and cultural ties with the US do not rest with Trump's administration. As the iconic photos of the late Janie Godley with her placard remind us, Trump should be met with audacious challenge rather than hospitality if he visits Scotland again. One thing the Scottish government must do as a matter of urgency is investigate Trump's investments in Scotland, not least because they were cited by the judge in the New York court case into Trump's civil fraud. Nobody should be above the law, and we need to uphold a zero-tolerance approach to financial crimes. The SNP have the power to use an unexplained wealth order, which the Scottish Greens have repeatedly called for, to reveal where the money came from that has funded his Scotland-based businesses. At the same time, it is essential that we acknowledge the reasons for his success and the threat the far right pose in this country too. The failure of the tepid political centre to offer the transformative solutions that protect people from rising prices or invest in communities. That failure has been successfully exploited by opportunistic far-right politicians like Trump and Reform. One thing that will have rung familiar to a lot of us is the division that the Trump campaign purposefully stirred up. He was far more concerned with driving people apart and playing communities off one another than he was with fostering any kind of unity. The relentless racism and the abuse of LGBTQ+ people, and trans people in particular, is not so far removed from the rhetoric that has been normalized in this country across so much of the political spectrum, especially the increasingly extreme Tory party. I strongly believe that, like our country, the US has the capacity to create a fair, just society that provides for people's needs and safeguards the future of the natural world we depend on. It's important to hold on to that belief, even if such hope is harder work than usual this week. We can only overcome the new far right and the threat they pose by standing together, supporting the people and groups in the firing line, reaffirming our commitment to universal human rights, and building a system that provides genuine safety and stability for all. The rise of Trump is symptomatic of legitimate discontent and a broken status quo. He may profess to love Scotland, but we need to ensure that the future we build here is as far removed as possible from the one he represents. That article was by Patrick Harvey. This is from the National of Friday, the 8th of November 2024, from the politics section. NC 500 visitors could face new levy as Highland Council proposes tourist tax. This article is by Adam Robertson. A Scottish council has proposed a 5% tourist tax, which it has said could raise up to £10 million a year for the local authority. Highland councillors will be asked to approve a 12-week consultation on the plan at a meeting next week. Should it go ahead, there would be an 18-month implementation period before the visitor levy is introduced in Highland Council in September 2026. In May, MSPs approved a plan for councils to add a charge to overnight accommodation, including B&Bs, hotels and holiday lets. The council has said the money could be used to support infrastructure which is under pressure due to the huge number of visitors, particularly due to the impact of the popular NC 500 road trip. Economy and Infrastructure Committee Chair Ken Gowan said, "Tourism is one of our most important sectors, and the levy could form an essential part of how we sustain, support and develop the services and infrastructure which the sector relies on. We have been engaging with stakeholders, and I would like to thank all the individuals and businesses who have taken part to date for their input and help to get us to this stage. If approved, the intention is for the 12-week public consultation period to commence on November 15th and close on February the 7th. The consultation will be available to view on the Highland Council's website, and paper copies will also be available on request. Gowans added the levy could raise £10 million to £11 million per year. It could bring us much more. It just depends. He said that council officials used Visit Scotland data to come up with the figures. Under the proposals passed by MSPs, the levy must be based on a percentage of an overnight stay in some types of accommodation. Accommodation providers are responsible for collecting the levy, which must be used to support facilities used primarily by business and leisure visitors. That article was by Adam Robertson. This is from the National of Friday, the 8th of November 2024, from the news section. New Scottish Highlands Initiative to Save Endangered Tree Species. This article is by Lucy Jackson. An initiative to save one of Scotland's native tree species has been launched in the Scottish Highlands. The new Cairngorms Aspen Network, aims to restore aspen tree habitats by mapping, expanding and connecting fragmented stands of the endangered tree in Cairngorms National Park. Aspens, which are characterized by shimmering foliage in summer and leaves which turn golden yellow in the autumn, were once common in Scotland, but have now largely disappeared as a result of deforestation and overgrazing. The network, a partnership between rewilding charity Trees for Life and the Cairngorms National Park Authority, will bring together experts, enthusiasts and land managers to take action to identify and restore the trees. Doing so, they said, will boost the wildlife and threatened species that depend on them and help build resilience against climate change. Neve Byrne, Aspen Project Officer at Trees for Life, said, "The new Aspen network will offer much-needed hope for tackling the nature and climate emergencies by developing a restored, better connected and healthier aspen network. By working together, we can improve the future of our aspen woodlands and the life they bring with them." The first stage of the project, which is being carried out by Trees for Life, will see the mapping of the location, condition and health of the existing aspens in the national park, alongside key plants and animals that depend upon them. This will be used to help identify key sites and management priorities, including growing and planting plans for creating a thriving new network of aspen. It will also create a blueprint for an approach to aspen conservation that could be rolled out across Scotland. Aspens have been especially hard hit by deforestation and overgrazing because they rarely flower or set seeds in Scotland, meaning that once the species is lost from an area, it is unlikely to return on its own. The deciduous trees, which can grow at elevations of up to 550 metres, today can often only regenerate in the highlands on rocky slopes or cliffs out of reach of grazing animals. These fragmented stands, sometimes comprising only a handful of old trees growing from the same root system, are geographically isolated, meaning they are unable to provide a proper habitat for species that depend upon them. Sarah Hensel, head of conservation at the Cairngorms National Park Authority, said, "Aspen is a priority species in Cairngorms National Park and hugely important resource for rare and threatened wildlife. Aspen also makes a significant contribution towards healthy and resilient nature networks in the national park. More than 60 insect species are known to feed on aspen foliage in Scotland, while young aspen shoots provide food for caterpillars of the rare dark-bordered beauty moth, and the endangered aspen hoverfly favours aspen deadwood. Aspen's high rate of leaf fall and production of deadwood also enrich soils, which creates optimum conditions for other plants and trees, and they are said to be highly valued by beavers. They also grow fast and die young, which the network said means they can lock carbon away efficiently. As the project develops, the network hopes there will also be scope for local volunteers to get involved, including by gaining hands-on rewilding experience and receiving training for carrying out aspen surveys. Trees for Life has been working to restore aspen to the highlands since 1991, including by growing and planting thousands of young aspen trees annually. It has also successfully encouraged aspens to produce seed under controlled conditions at its Dundregan rewilding estate at Glen Moriston, with the aim of producing new generations of the tree to support woodland restoration projects across the Highlands. The Cairngorms Aspen Network project is funded by a grant from the Cairngorms National Park Authority. That article was by Lucy Jackson. This is from the National of Friday the 8th of November 2024 from the news section. Nicola Sturgeon and Val McDermott to host Edinburgh Christmas Market event. This article is by Jodie Snedden. Former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is to host a Christmas book event alongside award-winning writer Val McDermott, organisers have announced. The festive event, titled In the Company of Books, will see the pair discuss the joys of reading with a glass of mulled wine in the Assembly Hall in Edinburgh. Special guests who are yet to be revealed will also join the event. Close friends, McDermott and Sturgeon, said in a joint statement, "Our love of books is what first drew us together, and it remains the mainstay of that friendship. Every conversation we have eventually meanders around to the books we are reading, what we've been enjoying, what has been making us laugh or cry, or keeping us on the edge of our seats. Now we want to share the love." The event is part of Edinburgh's Christmas, a series of events hosted by Unique Assembly, an organisation made up of unique events and assembly festivals. Several events and performances have been announced at the Assembly Hall, including stand-up comedy from Jason Byrne, and are to be held daily, except Christmas Day. McDermott has sold over 19 million books across the globe and has had them translated into more than 40 languages. She has received 6 honorary doctorates and is best known for her Wire in the Blood series, featuring clinical psychologist Dr. Tony Hill. Sturgeon is a keen reader and since stepping down from her role as First Minister has started work on her own memoir. She has long been a fan of McDermott's work, having first met her at the Edinburgh International Book Festival in 2015 and has regularly recommended her books on her annual Best Books list. Christmas in Edinburgh plays a huge part in Scotland's winter tourism. Last year alone, the city welcomed more than 3 million visitors to a range of festive events over a 7-week period. Unique Assembly, producers of Edinburgh's Christmas, said, "This is sure to be a highlight in the Christmas calendar, and we invite everyone to grab a glass of mulled wine and settle in for what will be a witty, warm and insightful event." That article was by Jodie Snedden.
From the National, Sunday, 10th of November 2024, from the news section. Keir Starmer offers Donald Trump state visit to UK, says X8. This article has been written by Steve Brown. Keir Starmer has offered Donald Trump a state visit to the UK, the president-elect's former senior aide has said. Rick Gates told the Sunday Mail the Prime Minister had been forced to eat humble pie after making an informal offer to Trump during a congratulatory call after he won the US presidential election last week. The political analyst also revealed his old boss, 78, would likely incorporate a visit to Scotland, where he owns golf courses in Ayrshire and Aberdeenshire, but added Trump was unlikely to recognize First Minister John Swinney from a stake on the ground. Labour helped organize for members to fly to the US to campaign for Kamala Harris, and it emerged one of Starmer's top advisors met with her team to brief them on Labour's general election strategy. But Gates, who helped Trump to victory over Hillary Clinton in 2016, said Keir Starmer was the third call to Donald Trump on election night. He got right out in front of it because he is the prime minister and he has to work with Donald Trump now, so he has no choice but to eat humble pie. Keir Starmer has got to dig himself out of a hole on the election interference story, but an informal offer of a state visit has been made. Not much can happen now before Trump is inaugurated. When that happens, I think he absolutely will want to come to Scotland. Gates said Trump's son Eric would be over quite a bit as the Gulf developments expand, and Trump would be not shy about coming to see his properties, suggesting he would likely visit Scotland before London. Gates, 52, served as Trump's deputy campaign manager in 2016 and pled guilty to conspiracy against the U.S. over statements made to an investigation into Russian interference. He said of opposition to Trump in the UK, it used to be the tradition for world leaders not to take a side in the elections of other countries, but it started to change in 2016 when you had people backing Hillary Clinton. Back then it was a surprise victory. This time there were less world leaders willing to stick their neck out. They were the smarter ones, while the Labour Party decided not to do that is something I am surprised by. On Sweeney, Gates said he doesn't know John Sweeney probably from a stick on the ground right now, but he will. He will be briefed and he is very good at keeping up with who criticizes him. He respects people who criticize him and acknowledge it and make amends. Gates spoke after Foreign Secretary David Lammy described his previous criticism of Trump as old news. Lammy tweeted that Trump was a woman-hating neo-Nazi sympathizing sociopath and a tyrant in 2018. However, in an interview following Trump's victory, he said that the president-elect was someone that we can build a relationship with in our national interest. He revealed that he had dinner with Trump recently and found him a very gracious host. Trump ally and Reform Party leader Nigel Farage speculated Trump would be visiting Scotland soon. He said his mom was Scottish and he absolutely loves the country, so I would think he will be visiting sometime soon. I genuinely think Trump considers Turnberry to be the jewel in the crown of his empire. He absolutely loves it there and he also loves the UK. That is why I think it is important this state visit does go ahead and that the Prime Minister negotiates a trade deal between the US and UK. Trump has expressed a desire to impose a 20% tariff on goods coming into the US. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn said that the only way to ease higher US tariffs when Trump returns to the White House in January is for the UK to rejoin the EU single market. The Scotch Whisky Association said that the 18 months of tariffs placed on the drink by Trump during his last term in office resulted in a £600 million dip in exports for the industry. Flynn said, if Trump tariffs become a reality, the only economic security and protection the UK can possibly seek is through rejoining the EU single market and customs union, the largest in the world. That is now the only path to protect our businesses and consumers in the face of deep economic uncertainty and the damage of global protectionism. This article has been written by Steve Braun. From the National, Sunday, 10th of November 2024. From the news section, Preeti Patel defends blaming US Capitol violence on Donald Trump. This article has been written by Steve Braun. Shadow Foreign Secretary Preeti Patel has defended saying President-elect Donald Trump directly provoked violence seen in the US Capitol in January 2021. In a heated interview on the BBC's Sunday with Laura Queensberg show, Patel said she felt the comments were right, fair, and relevant despite having criticized her government counterpart, David Lammy, for previously calling Trump a neo-Nazi sympathizing sociopath. In chaotic scenes on January 6, Trump supporters breached the Senate chamber in Washington, D.C., as politicians were convening to formally certify Joe Biden's presidential election victory. Patel said at the time that Trump's statement, in which he said, "We love you" to the rioters and repeated his unproven claims of electoral fraud, did very little to de escalate the situation and argued his comments directly led to the violence. She was heavily grilled about the comments on the BBC programme and seemed initially reluctant to stand by them. Host Quensberg said, "You have said several times you think this Labour government has to work really hard to make peace with Donald Trump in order to move forward. After the Capitol riots, you yourself said that Donald Trump's comments directly led to violence and he did very little to de-escalate the situation. Do you want to apologize to him as you have asked the Labour Party to do?" Patel replied, "Well, that was a major situation. I was Home Secretary at the time, and we were obviously working with our US counterparts on security issues, so no one wants to see violence after elections." Pushed again on whether she stood by her comments, she said, "Times have moved on because that situation, if you go back and saw the extent of the violence and effectively undermining of democracy, you saw what happened. Those pictures were pretty stark." Eventually, after the fourth time of asking, Patel stood by her remarks, but insisted Lamy's comments were much more personal. She said, "We were absolutely worried at the time. I think those comments, in light of what happened, were absolutely right and fair and relevant. The crucial thing right now, Laura, is you have asked me about previous comments, and the previous comments of our chief diplomat were much more personal and undiplomatic to the President-elect of the United States." After insisting she had built a relationship with Trump based on trust while she was Home Secretary, she said, "This government, I suspect, will have to work that much harder to regain trust and respect." Following the riots on January 6, 2021, Patel said, "Well, Mr. Trump's comments directly led to the violence, and so far he has replied to condemn that violence. That is completely wrong. What we have seen in Washington and the display of the violence, he basically has made a number of comments yesterday that helped to fuel that violence, and he didn't do anything to de-escalate that whatsoever. Donald Trump should have really condemned that violence, and he has failed to do that, and I think that's wrong." Ange- Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader at the time and now deputy prime minister, also said that the violence was directly linked to Trump. She said, "The violence that Donald Trump has unleashed is terrifying, and the Republicans who stood by him have blood on their hands." This article has been written by Steph Braun.
This is from The National on Monday, 11th November 2024. From the Politics section. Charities issue advice to elderly ahead of winter following cuts. By Sophie McGrain. Charities and campaign groups are issuing crucial advice for Scotland's elderly population amid fears over the impact of Labour slashing winter fuel payments. Figures obtained by Age Scotland from the Scottish Ambulance Service revealed that nearly 900 pensioners were hospitalised with hypothermia last December alone. The charity believes the UK government has missed an opportunity to support the nation's elderly population. Adam Stracura, head of policy at Age Scotland, said, "Many pensioners already live on very modest incomes. With energy bills rising, they're left choosing between staying warm and managing other essential expenses. It's a recipe for disaster." The vast majority, if not almost 90% of pensioners, have less money in their bank accounts than they would have had to pay energy bills because of the winter fuel payment is gone for them. For many, that £200 or £300 payment was a lifeline, and without it, we worry we'll see even higher numbers of hospital admissions this year. Living in a poorly heated home is especially dangerous for older people who already struggle with multiple health conditions that can be worsened by prolonged periods of time in cold environments. These conditions include an increased chance of having a heart attack or stroke, respiratory conditions such as bronchitis or COPD, and hypothermia. To combat these risks, health experts recommend that pensioners take proactive steps to keep warm and safe this winter. Charities such as Age Scotland and British Geriatrics Society are encouraging older adults to check their eligibility for additional financial support, as many low-income pensioners are often unaware of the benefits they may qualify for. Strachura continued, "There's a huge amount of social security that goes underclaimed by older people every year. Our helpline provides benefit checks, which can help identify if people qualify for support like pension credit or council tax reductions. Last year, we identified about an extra £2 million people who wouldn't have claimed otherwise." Age Scotland also recommends pensioners reaching out to energy, mobile or broadband suppliers to see if they have any measures in place to help. Many companies offer a social tariff for people on low incomes, which can significantly reduce monthly costs. Sometimes people are quite shy about coming forward and asking for that. But if there's ever a time to do it, it's now. I think there are lots of companies that are trying to help, but people maybe aren't coming forward as much as they might have hoped to get that help, Strachura explained. Families and neighbours of elderly people can also do their bit to help keep their older loved ones safe by looking out for early signs of hypothermia, such as confusion, fatigue and difficulties with daily tasks. Dr Bob Castlake, Chair of the British Geriatric Society Scotland Council and a consultant geriatrician in Aberdeen, said, "Older people with frailty are at greater risk of becoming unwell in the winter months, from things like inadequately heated houses, falls on icy streets and social isolation from being unable to get out than younger adults would be. Things to look out for are falls, people not managing day-to-day tasks as well as they usually can, sleepiness, personality change and confusion. There are lots of different causes for these things, but the key thing is to get people checked out early if you start to notice a problem. For family, friends and neighbours, please check in and stay connected with the older people in your life. We all live busy lives, but dropping by to make sure someone's doing okay or inviting them round for a cuppa can make all the difference in keeping them warm and safe. Age Scotland is urging Scottish Government to step up where the UK Government has not and restore the universal winter fuel payment in the wake of the UK budget. Strachura said, "This was a big opportunity for the Chancellor and Prime Minister to protect the health of hundreds of thousands of low-income pensioners in Scotland, and they missed it." However, with an extra £3.4 billion allocation announced for Scotland, we desperately hope the Scottish Government will now use it to reinstate the devolved pension age winter heating payment for all older people, the cost of which would amount to less than 5% of that extra money. This would show what Scotland can do with using the powers of devolution. That article was by Sophie McGrain. This is from The National on Monday 11th November 2024, from the News section. Scottish University to host European Quantum Light Tour, by Anna Flynn. A Scottish university is set to welcome a pioneering light source that is travelling across 12 countries in Europe, with hopes it will transform the computing and cybersecurity industries. Heriot-Watt University will host the Quan Tour on Monday ahead of the UNESCO International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. The quantum light source, which generates photons using a quantum dot, produces single particles of light, or photons, that scientists can examine on a microscopic level to develop higher performing applications in cybersecurity. The quantum light source was built at Technische Universität Berlin, a research university in Berlin, and is coming to Edinburgh from Cork before being transported to the Netherlands. Other stops on the tour include Madrid, Paris, Rome and Stockholm. One research student said using single photons to encrypt data can make communication completely unhackable. The tiny structure, made of semiconductor materials, is commonly found in mobile phones, but in this case has been shrunken to a few nanometers. A nanometer is 1/1000th of a metre. The quantum light source is to be hosted one of the physics labs at Heriot-Watt, run by Professor Brian Garardot. Garardot is an expert in the science of light, quantum photonics, and believes this is a great opportunity to connect with the research community in this area. He said, "A lot of the technology behind quantum light source has been developed here and in other laboratories taking part." Frederick Brooke Barnes, a postgraduate research student working with Garardot, explained that using single photons to encrypt data makes communication completely unhackable. It means that someone trying to eavesdrop on the information being sent can't do so without being detected. That means that the information is always going to be secure and is guaranteed by the laws of physics, Barnes said. As part of the Quan Tour, the team in Scotland will measure and record the characteristics of the photons produced and share this data with the other quantum teams taking part. Frederick and fellow PhD student Sheena Saji have organised a welcoming event for the Quan Tour, including a Scottish bagpiper. Although the Quan Tour's visit won't be open to the public, the university is hosting a single separate photon workshop that is open to all. This takes place at the Edinburgh International Conference Centre from November 18th until 22nd and will showcase cutting-edge advances in the technology. The selected year for this initiative, 2025, marks 100 years since the initial development of quantum mechanics. That article was by Anna Flynn. This is from The National on Monday, 11th November 2024, from the Politics section. SNP plot to sabotage Labour's House of Lords bill, by James Walker. The SNP are set to lodge a series of amendments in an attempt to sabotage Labour's House of Lords legislation. It comes as the bill is set to come before the House of Commons on Tuesday. SNP Deputy Leader Pete Wishart will lodge an amendment to see the Lords abolished entirely, but he will also lodge a further amendment to force peers to pay income tax on their parliamentary pay. The tax-free pay, currently worth up to £361 per day, is payable to members of the House of Lords for any day they turn up in Parliament, even just to sign in to confirm their attendance. Last year, Lords claimed more than £20 million in attendance allowances, all tax-free. The SNP said This means peers avoided up to £9 million in income tax last year. The cost of the House of Lords was also £212 million last year, according to research from the House of Commons Library commissioned by the SNP. Wishart has now challenged Labour MPs in Scotland to back his amendments, which he says are the only viable option for anyone who believes in democracy. He said, unlike the Westminster parties, the SNP want the House of Lords abolished, plain and simple. There's no justification for this undemocratic and outdated institution to exist any longer, and it's a complete joke for their members not to pay a single penny of income tax on their salary for simply turning up. At the very least, Scottish Labour MPs should join me in forcing Lords to cough up and pay tax on their £342 a day pay. That's the only viable option for anyone who believes in democracy. But if they won't, then they must explain to voters why they believe they should pay tax but ermine-clad Labour bigwigs and the Lords shouldn't. The senior SNP figure added, the Labour Party has repeatedly broken its promise to abolish the House of Lords for more than a century, and frankly, this embarrassingly limited bill is 114 years too late. Too late. Voters were promised change, but instead Sir Keir Starmer has ripped up his election pledges and continued stuffing the Lords with Labour Party donors and cronies as it suits him. The undemocratic House of Lords is an archaic institution of the kind you'd find in a banana republic, and it's second only in size to the Congress of China, costing taxpayers more than £200 million a year. If it was any other country, the government would rightly think it utterly corrupt. But while the Labour Party may have watered down their promises on Lords reform, our values in the SNP remain clear. Abolish it, and abolish it now. That article was by James Walker. This is from The National on Monday, 11th November 2024. From the News section. Thousands of oysters reintroduction into the Firth of Forth doing well. By Gregor Young. Marine experts have expressed delight over positive signs that thousands of oysters released into the Firth of Forth are settling well into their new environment. Heriot-Watt University, one of a group of organisations involved in a project to reintroduce European flat oysters to the estuary, recently led monitoring sessions with divers and underwater camera equipment to check on their status. Oysters have been absent from the Firth of Forth for nearly 100 years. And so far, those reintroduced to the area through the Restoration Forth project have had an 85% survival rate. Around 30,000 oysters have been released into the estuary since September last year, with monitoring taking place at 4 restoration sites to track their progress. Edinburgh Shoreline, Fife Coast and Countryside Trust, the Marine Conservation Society, Project Seagrass and the World Wide Fund are among the numerous organisations involved in the project. Bill Sanderson, Professor of Marine Biodiversity at Heriot-Watt, said, "From its inception, Restoration Forth has taken careful steps to find the best places to restore oysters on the Firth of Forth. We are delighted that their high survival so far reflects the painstaking efforts we have made to support this initiative." Naomi Keenan, an Heriot-Watt Research Associate for the project, said, "We have worked with hundreds of people from around the Forth to clean and move oysters to their new home. Working with the volunteers over the next year, we hope to see these oysters continue to thrive and to start to enhance the biodiversity on the seabed. Our project will not only bring back a native species lost to overfishing in the 1800s, but also the ecosystem services these animals bring with them. Oysters enhance water quality through filter feeding, store carbon, and enhance biodiversity by creating a complex habitat, providing homes and shelter for countless other organisms. Anna Inman, Shellfish Engagement Officer at the Marine Conservation Society, said, "The local support for oyster restoration has been incredible. We truly appreciate all the hard work that's gone into bringing oysters back to the Firth of Forth. This achievement is a testament to the dedication of all the volunteers who have generously given their time. The project not only aims to revive marine life, but also highlights the cultural heritage of oysters and emphasises our collective responsibility to restore and protect our seas for future generations." Naomi Arnold, Restoration Forth Project Manager for WWF Scotland, said, "We're delighted by the early signs of success. This is down to the hard work, not only of the staff involved, but the hundreds of volunteers who have turned out in all weathers to help us prepare the oysters for deployment and to physically put them in the water. This is a key milestone in our project. With this success and the amount we've learned, things are looking very positive for future restoration in the area." That article was by Gregor Young.
From the National, Tuesday the 12th of November 2024, from the Politics section. Devolved Scottish Welfare Agency delivered nearly £2 billion in benefits. Article written by Lucy Jackson. The devolved welfare agency, Social Security Scotland, delivered benefits worth nearly £2 billion in the last financial year. The agency's accounts show that in 2023 to 2024, it spent £1.9 billion, including just over £942 million on adult disability payment, its largest area of expenditure, which supports more than 300,000 people in Scotland. It spent £429 million on the Scottish Child Payment, with the number of individual clients increasing to 204,465. During 2023 to 2024, some £3.2 billion in benefits was paid via agency agreements with the Department for Work and Pensions. Social Security Scotland's share of welfare spending is expected to increase significantly during the current financial year as PIP claims are transferred to the devolved agency. It is expected that the transfer of PIP to adult disability payment will be completed in 2024 to 2025 and will mean Social Security Scotland administers most devolved benefit expenditure itself. Social Justice Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville said, "We are committed to tackling poverty and supporting people throughout Scotland. At a time when families are struggling with the ongoing cost of living crisis, we have been delivering 14 benefits, 7 of which are only available in Scotland. Winter heating payment is a reliable annual payment to people on low incomes in Scotland, including pensioners receiving pension credit. We continue to offer vital support to families through our 5 family payments, including Scottish Child Payment, which was helping to support more than 329,000 children and young people by the end of financial year 2023 to 2024. Social Security Scotland Chief Executive David Wallace said, "While our service has continued to expand significantly, our clients remain at the heart of everything we do. We have focused on delivering new payments to people across Scotland, including carer support payment, while ensuring we give our clients an improved experience. This year, we have reduced call waiting and processing times and made it easier for people to submit supporting information for disability benefit payment applications." And that article was written by Lucy Jackson. From the National, Tuesday the 12th of November 2024, from the Politics section. Stephen Flynn confirms bid to stand for SNP at next Holyrood election. Article written by Adam Robertson. SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn has confirmed his bid to run to be an MSP at the 2026 Holyrood election. There had been plenty of speculation as to whether the Aberdeen South MP would put himself forward for a seat in the Scottish Parliament, and he has now confirmed the bid in an interview with the Press and Journal. He told the newspaper he would be campaigning to stand for the Aberdeen South and North Kincardine seat. Flynn also confirmed that, should he win a seat in Holyrood, he would not take a second parliamentary income. He told the Press and Journal, "It's never an easy decision to put yourself forward for election. You have to discuss things with friends and family. I took some time to properly think things over because there was a high degree of interest in what I was going to do or not going to do next. I came to the conclusion I don't want to sit it out. I don't want to sit out those battles that are coming from Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire and the wider nation." In 2020, the SNP's National Executive Committee, NEC, rewrote the rules to make it harder for sitting MPs to switch to Holyrood, forcing them to resign their seats should they wish to become candidates. The decision forced former MP Joanna Cherry to rule herself out from standing in the 2021 Holyrood election. Writing on Twitter/X, Cherry said, "I wish Stephen well. The SNP badly needs new blood at Holyrood. The rule against dual mandates introduced by the NEC in 2021 was not election-specific, it was person-specific. It served its purpose and I predict it will be removed." Flynn had said he felt the rules put in place by the NEC were election-specific, and added that it did not fill him with any great delight to go up against sitting SNP MSP Audrey Nicholl for selection to the constituency. Different people are chosen to represent the team at different moments in time, and it will be for SNP members to determine who is ultimately their candidate in Aberdeen South and Kincardine, he said. And that article was written by Adam Robertson.
From the National, Monday the 11th of November, from the comment section. Remembrance must not be mood music for a return of conscription, by George Caravan. I am not a great fan of Remembrance Day commemorations, at least not as they have evolved. In fact, I'm feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the current trend to romanticise the act of dying in wars perpetrated by the British state. It is not that I am unmoved or churlish when it comes to personal sacrifice. On Remembrance Day, I shed my own tears for those in my family who did not return from those wars, or who came home the worse for mental wear. And I mourn all those who died in the great conflicts, soldiers, sailors, aviators and innocent civilians. But there is a great danger, certainly in the British historical context, of forgetting that much of this sacrifice was enforced through state conscription, and often tragically unnecessary. It certainly should not be used to glorify the military, or justify the current global moves towards rearmament and war. And that is what I fear is happening. My family gave their all in 2 world wars in a clutch of colonial adventures. My grandfather, Thomas Caravan, fought in the Boer War and then was recalled, unwillingly, to the colours in 1914 at the start of the vicious imperial spasm dignified with the title Great War. Sadly, the British and European socialist parties abandoned their pre-war policy of calling a general strike to prevent a European conflict. Within a year, 1 million or more souls were dead or wounded for no gain whatsoever. My grandfather was wounded at Ypres and invalided out, which is probably a good thing. He thus avoided being one of the 20 million or so soldiers to die in the 4 years of massacre. Nobody really knows the true casualty figures. The fiancé of my granny on my mother's side was one of those who did not come back and left my grandmother pregnant. The Great War turned my grandfather into an ardent socialist. We forget that only about 30% of adults in Britain had the vote in 1914. This was never a war for democracy. When the initial source of volunteers dried up after a year of fighting, Prime Minister Lord George brought in conscription. Many of the honoured dead in Flanders Field were unwilling conscripts who had no vote, After the insanity of the Battle of the Somme in 1916, popular support for the war turned to outright opposition. Throughout 1917, Britain was gripped by a wave of strikes, largely in opposition to the extension of conscription, as the army ran out of cannon fodder. The government responded by closing anti-war newspapers and jailing anti-war protesters. The madness only ended when the German Imperial Army mutinied, shot their officers and went home. In 1919, when Winston Churchill delayed demobilisation so he could send troops to Russia to overthrow the Bolsheviks, the mutiny spread to the British Army. You'll find the odd war memorial that reads 1914 to 19. That's no mistake. Churchill would have kept the global conflict going if British Scotties hadn't told him and the War Office to get stuffed. That resistance to more sacrifice is worth remembering when you wear a poppy. Of course, with the threat of totalitarian fascism, the Second World War proved a different case. My father and uncles went to war with a sense of purpose. Of the Caravan brothers, 2 joined the RAF, one was in the Long Range Desert Group, and one became a naval officer. My uncle James did not return home after his Lancaster was shot down over the Ruhr. His body was never found. But if working class Britain supported fighting Hitler, it did not do so in a craven manner. My father led a mutiny in his RAF unit against poor leadership and officer stupidity. My uncle Robert, my mother's brother, carried on the Clydeside pacifist tradition by refusing to shoot Germans for Winston Churchill. Instead, he worked on the railways and served in the Home Guard, where he deliberately wore an outside cap to poke fun at pompous Captain Mannering types. As for my mother, she was also in the RAF. To her dying days, she disparaged Winston Churchill for shooting Welsh miners. Uncle Jim, my mother's youngest brother, missed the Second World War, but he ended up in Korea while in national service. Korea was the first great battle of the Cold War, and more than 3 million were killed. Britain sent 60,000 conscript troops to this sideshow, more than 1,000 of whom never came back. Britain then spent the 1950s and 1960s fighting a host of now forgotten colonial wars as we retreated from empire. Cyprus, Suez, Malaya, Aden, Kenya, and more. The growing hostility and passive resistance of British conscripts in these daft but bloody wars led to national service being scrapped in 1960. No one wanted to be sacrificed for the flag any longer. That remains the case. Answering questions in Parliament last month, Labour's Defence Secretary John Healey admitted that the British Army is set to fall below 70,000 soldiers. That's its lowest size in 230 years, though there are a further 30,000 reservists. The reluctance to fight on the part of young Britons led, earlier this year, to a proposal from Rishi Sunak to reintroduce mandatory conscription. The Tories disguised this move by suggesting that most 18-year-olds would be compelled to do a form of community service, but that they could volunteer to opt into a military training scheme as an alternative. Keir Starmer rejected the notion and, ostensibly, died a death when Labour won the election, but Labour now have initiated a new defence review. While Starmer and Healey have been wary of setting a target to increase troop numbers that can't be far off, with the election of Donald Trump, the world has entered a new and dangerous era. All the major powers have been busy refurbishing their nuclear arsenals for some time, but the bloody conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East have opened the prospect of extensive ground wars becoming the new normal. That will certainly cue the expansion of conventional armies as well. For instance, the Ukrainian armed forces have around 1.2 million personnel under arms, with another 2.5 million reservists. Britain is a minnow by comparison. It is difficult to see how the powers that be will allow that to continue. Which is precisely why I am suspicious of any attempts to glorify the sacrifice of our honoured dead for political purposes. That all too easily becomes the mood music for encouraging the return of conscription. We need to remember our dead and maimed, if for no other reason that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Equally, we should not reduce remembrance to a trite political lesson about the horrors of war. There is room to dwell on the terrible individual loss, the pain of those left behind, and the mental anguish of those who survived. But we have entered a new, uncertain period in human history. Our war dead would most certainly have chosen life over extinction if there was a decision to make. The best way of honouring their memory is to ensure we end wars. That has never been so urgent as now. And that was a comment piece by George Caravan. From the National, Monday the 11th of November, from the comment section. Tories are out, but Margaret Thatcher's legacy lives on with Labour. By Professor Gregor Gall. Readers of the National will not have been much moved by the criticism from the likes of the right-wing tabloids, the Daily Mail or Daily Express of Rachel Reeves' first budget. The day after the budget, their front-page headlines were of a Halloween horror. But National readers may have been taking a bit more notice of the international money markets being a bit spooked, leading to the value of the pound to fall significantly against the euro and the US dollar as a result. Either way, the Chancellor's budget was deemed a surprising tax and spend one after months of her and Keir Starmer's efforts to say there was limited room for manoeuvre given the legacy left to them by the Tories, a £22 billion black hole, and pledges not to turn on the taps of public spending. Even The Guardian and The Mirror called it tax and spend budget, albeit from a different point of view, that this was good for public services or certainly an improvement on what had gone before. Meantime, the Mail and Express and their broadsheet brothers and sisters argued that the enterprise, economic growth and wealth creation would be badly hit. All were concerned about the possibility of an increase in inheritance tax on property, possessions and money, as this is the main way wealth is passed down the generations from parents to children. If there can be said to be a good side to the budget, it was that this new Labour government can be successfully subject to public pressure, albeit from the right as well as the left. After a disastrous start to its first term in office in more than a decade, Labour did sense the need to placate many angry citizens. Out of the rabbit's magician's hat, Reeves produced the idea she could loosen those self-imposed rules by spending and definitions of debt. But if we step away from these more immediate concerns, there is a bigger and longer term picture to be seen. This concerns the current and continuing consensus between Labour and the Tories on the matters of the economy. Fiscal responsibility has been the motto of Reeves in her time as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, and now as Chancellor, she has stated she will be an iron Chancellor in applying fiscal responsibility. And Reeves, like Starmer himself, believes that fiscal responsibility, as determined by the international money markets, is the only route to economic growth because it provides the investors, hedge funds, private equity operators and the like with financial stability and reassurance on their terms. With economic growth and no runs in the pound or disinvestment, then there is then more revenue to tax so that the resources are created for funding public services. This, the argument goes, does not then require raising taxes, whether in a progressive or regressive way, and it certainly does not require any redistribution of wealth. This was also the policy of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown in the new Labour era. Brown's favourite phase was fiscal prudence, and he also pledged to be an iron Chancellor. It was on this basis that The Economist, the right-wing political weekly, last year created the portmanteau of Ms. Heaves, the combination of Reeves and previous Tory Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. The use of the term portmanteau is derived from the name given to a large travelling bag, opening into two equal parts. In time, Ms. Heaves has developed into an ideology called Heavesianism. So, despite the Tories being out of office, nonetheless their legacy carries on in an active way. What makes the creation of the Ms. Heaves portmanteau so significant is that in 1954, The Economist created the portmanteau of Mr. Butskill from the names of Tory Chancellor Rab Butler, 1951 to 55, and Labour Chancellor Hugh Gateskill, 1950 to 51. Shortly thereafter, bootskillism came into being. This was because Butler largely followed the economic policies of his Gate School by pursuing a mixed economy and Keynesian economics as part of the post-war consensus. This was made all the easier by Gate School being in the right wing of Labour, so that he was closer to Butler than the likes of Aaron Bevan and other left-wingers who resigned from the Labour cabinet when Gate School introduced charges for NHS dentistry and optometry in 1951. Butler extended these charges the following year. As with Hunt and Reeves, the difference between Butler and Gate School were relatively minor in the scheme of things. Butler had more interest in using monetary policy, whereas Gate School was more inclined to use exchange controls. Of course, the post-war consensus was based upon state intervention to right some of the wrongs of the free market. In smashing this consensus, Thatcher shifted the centre of political gravity rightwards, which Labour then followed. In other words, historically, Labour and Tories have had more often than not have the same overall economic perspective. Any variations have been but variations on the same theme. And that was a comment piece by Professor Gregor Gall, who is a research associate at the University of Glasgow and editor of A New Scotland, Building an Equal, Fair and Sustainable Society, Poodle Press, 2022. From the National, Monday the 11th of November, from the comment section. Why recognition of BSL in our education bill is vital, by Hannah Butcher. Debates on the Education Scotland bill, currently making its way through the Scottish Parliament, have focused on the impact of the creation of two new education bodies, Qualification Scotland and the new Education Inspectorate. However, the wording of the bill has caused major concern for those who use British Sign Language, BSL, in Scotland. I am deaf and a BSL user, which means I have experienced the isolation firsthand of not being able to communicate in my chosen language, especially in school. When I was growing up, this had a massive impact on my education and mental well-being. I remember what it was like in my classroom when I was unable to keep up with discussions in spoken English. I dreaded being asked a question while still trying to piece together through lip reading what had been said. I also remember the massive improvement in my learning abilities that came once I could use BSL to communicate during higher education, both in college and at university. Being able to communicate in our natural language is a fundamental human right, and this applies to BSL for many deaf children and adults, including myself. This right to our language and our culture is now enshrined in law in Scotland, since it became the first nation of the UK to incorporate the UN Convention on Rights of the Child, UNCRC, into law. Article 30 of the UNCRC states that minority groups have a right to use their language, which for many deaf people is BSL. Therefore, the failure to recognise the needs of users and learners of BSL in the first draft of the Education Bill was extremely disappointing. Currently, the new bill says the new education bodies, including a new exam board for Scotland, being created by the bill must consider the needs of pupils who learn and use Gaelic. This is quite right. Just like BSL, the Gaelic language is a door into culture and community with deep roots in Scotland. But it is quite wrong that BSL was not recognised in a similar way. This omission could have an impact on the many deaf children and young people who use BSL as their first language, or who wish to learn BSL. This would affect their education in terms of learning and being included in their school environment too. Because of this, I am proud to be part of a campaign to change the bill and give BSL the recognition it deserves. The National Deaf Children's Society, the charity I work for, has joined up with other organisations including RNID, Deaf Action, Deafblind Scotland and local groups such as Lothian Children Deaf Club to work together to change the bill. Being part of this campaign is so important. It's vital to ensure future generations of deaf children and young people in Scotland have full access to exams via BSL and that school inspections ask questions about BSL access. The first step was that the charities worked together on a joint evidence to the Scottish Parliament Committee discussing the bill. All the organisations then asked their members and supporters to write to the committee in support of our joint evidence. Nearly 400 people joined in this first phase of our campaign. We also wrote to members of the committee and requested that they ask questions about BSL during its discussions on the bill. We were delighted when, during the committee's final evidence session on the bill in October, George Adam MSP asked the Minister in charge of the bill, Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth, about BSL being overlooked. She said she recognised the importance of BSL and would get back to the committee with a suggested way forward. The convener of the committee then highlighted how many members of the public had been in contact with their concerns. However, this is just the beginning. Soon the whole Parliament will get to debate the bill. We will make every member of the Scottish Parliament know that BSL must not be forgotten. We hope the Minister comes back with a good proposal, but we will not stop campaigning until the bill has been changed. Hopefully, all this campaign activity will lead to the bill being amended and BSL users and learners in Scotland getting the recognition they need. No more deaf children should experience what I went through in school. And that was a comment piece by Hannah Butcher, who is a member of the National Deaf Children's Society Policy and Campaigns team. That piece was read by me, Ian McKenna.
The National News on Wednesday the 13th of November. Tennis legend Andy Murray announces a new theatre tour. An article written by Adam Robertson. Scottish tennis legend Andy Murray has announced a new theatre tour set to take place next summer. The former world number 1 and 3-time Grand Slam winner made the announcement in a post on X, formerly known as Twitter. He said, "I'm stepping onto a different stage this summer. Come and see me on my first ever theatre tour with Andrew Cotter in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Hammersmith and Wimbledon." Andy Murray retired from tennis earlier this year, playing his final game at the Paris Olympics 21 years after his first professional match. On the website, the event's description says, "In conversation with sports broadcaster Andrew Cotter, they'll recount intimate and untold moments from Andy's career in this unforgettable live experience. Andy's journey is far from over. Join him live as he tells his story of perseverance, growth and finding a path beyond the court, ready to serve up his next adventure." Andy will be touring for 4 UK dates only during the 2025 grass court season. Don't miss this chance to connect with a true sporting legend. Game, set and chat. Given the exclusive and intimate nature of this event, the show will be a phoneless experience and all mobiles will be placed in lockable pouches. Andy Murray said the tickets would be available on his website from Thursday. You can visit andymurray.com. Many fans took to the comments to show their excitement, with one saying, "Congratulations on your new journey." "Good luck with it, Andy," said another, while a third person encouraged Andy Murray to come to Australia and that they were wishing him all the best. An article written by Adam Robertson. The National News on Wednesday the 13th of November. Loganair cabin crew win a pay rise deal worth 26.7% in total. An article written by Lucy Jackson. Workers at Scotland's regional airline have secured a pay rise above inflation. Yesterday, trade union Unite confirmed that it had won a pay deal worth an overall increase of 26.7%. The deal, which is UK-wide, will cover cabin crew servicing flights from across the UK and Ireland, including in Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow and in Shetland. The union said that more than 120 Loganair cabin crew will benefit from the deal, which amounts to an average basic pay increase of 23%, which then rises to 26.7% when other pay benefits and allowances are included. The highest pay rise will be for Loganair cabin crew trainers, who are set for a substantial increase of around £8,300, or 29.3%, on basic hourly rates. The deal runs from September 2024 to April 2026. Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham said, Unite has delivered a substantial pay win for Loganair cabin crew workers across the UK and Ireland. It's further evidence that we are securing better pay packages for workers throughout the aviation industry. The message to all airport workers is clear. If you want better jobs, pay and conditions, join Unite. Alongside this pay deal, Unite has also secured a number of wins across Scottish airports, including a 12.8% pay increase for Aberdeen and Glasgow airport security workers and a 12% basic pay increase for Edinburgh airport service workers. Pat McElvogue, Unite Industrial Officer, said, Unite has successfully negotiated another pay deal which will make a real difference. We believe this deal will set a benchmark for the rest of the aviation industry, and it demonstrates the clear value of being a member of Unite. An article written by Lucy Jackson. The National News on Wednesday the 13th of November. Free night buses to operate across a Scottish city during the festive season. An article written by Laura Pollock. Several night buses operating across one Scottish city during the festive season will be free. Aberdeen City Council has contracted 10 routes across Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire to First Bus. The festive season will see the routes operate on weekends from November the 16th until the 1st of January. Funding for the buses will be from bus lane enforcement revenue and will operate on Friday night into Saturday morning and on Saturday night into Sunday morning only. The council hopes that more people will spend time in the city centre and then use the safe and free transport from midnight to approximately 3:30 a.m. Aberdeen City Council co-leader Ian Yule said, I'm delighted that the council is able to provide these free night bus services. Aberdeen's night buses were very popular in the past, and I'm sure that they will be just as popular this year, especially during the festive period when more people than normal are out enjoying the cafes, restaurants and pubs in the city centre. The night buses will provide a safe and efficient transport for visitors to our city centre. I hope as many people as possible take advantage of this free and safe transport home. His co-leader, Councillor Christian Allard, added, the return of the night buses will be welcomed by not just people enjoying a night out, but also by businesses in the city centre. The Aberdeen City Council move will help to support businesses by giving people another transport option for getting home. David Adam, Operations Manager for First Aberdeen, said, we are absolutely delighted to be running Aberdeen's night bus network over the festive period, supporting the city's nighttime economy while also helping people get home safely and completely free of charge at the weekend. We are aware of the challenges that people have experienced in getting home from a night out, an event, or indeed after a night shift in the city centre in the early hours of the morning, and hope that the night bus network will allow more people to enjoy all that Aberdeen has to offer. An article written by Laura Pollock. The National Politics on Wednesday the 13th of November. Prime Minister is left embarrassed after Sue Gray rejects a fake Nations Envoy role. An article written by Xander Elliots. Sir Keir Starmer has been utterly embarrassed after trying to give Sue Gray a fake job as Nations Envoy, the SNP has said. The party's chief whip at Westminster, Kirsty Blackman, spoke out after confirmation that Ms Gray would not be taking up the role Downing Street had previously described as vital. Initial media reports said that Number 10 had decided to withdraw the offer of the role, before later quotes from allies of Ms Gray in the Financial Times said that she had in fact rejected it. Asked whether the job offer was withdrawn or if Ms Gray walked away, a Number 10 spokesperson confirmed it had been her decision. They said, as we said at the time, the appointment has been agreed and you had the focus for the new role and the original statements from both the Prime Minister and from Sue Gray. Subsequent to that, we confirmed that she was taking a break between roles and taking up duties, and as I said, I can update that she has since decided not to take up the role. Downing Street said that there were now no plans to fill the nation's envoy role. Asked why, given it was previously described as vital to government, Number 10 said that Ms Gray had been uniquely placed to hold the position and repeated that the role would be kept under review. Ms Gray would have acted as a go-between for ministers with devolved governments, but First Minister John Swinney said that he would not be dealing through envoys and that he expects a direct relationship with the UK Prime Minister. Ms Gray's resignation as Chief of Staff came amid bitter infighting in Labour's new Number 10, and she was swiftly replaced by close Starmer advisor Morgan McSweeney. Although Ms Gray's Nations and Regions envoy role was also swiftly announced, she missed a key summit days later. There was no information provided on the job description and no information as to when she would begin. SNP Chief Whip Ms Blackman said, "This is an utterly embarrassing saga for Sir Keir Starmer, but throughout this sorry affair one thing is clear. Sue Gray has been made to pay the price for his mistakes." Mr Starmer made the disastrous decision to strip the winter fuel payment from millions of pensioners, and in the face of public outcry, instead of taking responsibility, he sacked Sue Gray and gave her a fake job. While this, quite frankly, humiliating story plays out, 900,000 Scottish pensioners face a bleak winter thanks to Sir Keir Starmer's government. It's not Sue Gray that caused Labour government poll ratings to plummet. It's a Labour Prime Minister hell-bent on robbing pensioners of support this winter. Scottish Green co-leader Patrick Harvie said that the Labour government clearly doesn't know what devolved parliaments need or want, which is why he has proposed this non-entity role that was rejected by the office holder before she even began. For years, Scotland has been forced to watch on as our budgets have been slashed, our powers have been snatched, and Westminster's overreach has got out of control. Desperately trying to appoint a new envoy to relieve his internal issues is just papering over the deep cracks. We need real systematic change to respect Scotland's democracy, he said. Sue Gray became a public figure as the civil servant who spearheaded the report into the Partygate scandal. In March 2023, she resigned from the civil service to take up the Chief of Staff role for Mr Starmer. An article written by Xander Elliots. The National Politics on Wednesday the 13th of November. SNP politicians call for Stephen Flynn to rethink his MSP bid. A front-page article written by Xander Elliots. Stephen Flynn should rethink his intention to stand for Holyrood whilst holding on to his seat at Westminster, as it opens up the SNP to accusations of cronyism, former Scottish Government ministers have said. On Tuesday, the SNP Westminster leader used a column in the Press and Journal newspaper to announce a bid to replace Audrey Nicholl as the MSP for Aberdeen South and North Kincardine. Should he win election to Holyrood, Mr Flynn said he would not resign his Westminster seat, but also said that he would not take two parliamentary incomes. It comes despite a rule brought in by the SNP's National Executive Committee ahead of the 2021 Holyrood elections, which said that any MP wishing to become an MSP would have to resign their Westminster seat first. That rule saw Neil Gray resign as an MP and Joanna Cherry decide not to run for Holyrood. However, it's understood that the rule was election-specific and would have to be reinstated to take effect in 2026. Responding to Mr Flynn's announcement, former SNP ministers called for a rethink. MSP Emma Roddick wrote on social media, "Party members set this rule for good reasons. Rightly, Douglas Ross was criticised for holding two roles simultaneously. I hope Stephen Flynn rethinks. I can't imagine spending half my time in London and being a good MSP. It's key that rules apply to everyone equally, men and women." Alex Neil, the former Health Secretary, said he had no objection to Stephen wanting to go to Holyrood, but added that the rules on how he does it shouldn't be changed to suit individuals, no matter how talented they are. Basic democratic principles should be equally applied to every party member, Mr Neil said. He further added in a post shared by Ms Cherry that changing the rules would open the party up to charges of unfairness and cronyism. NEC member Bill Ramsey told The National that he was happy to hear Mr Flynn's intention to stand for Holyrood. Speaking personally, the news that Stephen Flynn is throwing his hat in the ring for Holyrood in 2026 is really positive, he said. On the dual mandate rule, he added, the issue of standing down in conditions of near electoral hegemony, as in 2021, are rather different from what will probably be a closer electoral contest in 2026. Anonymous SNP politicians used stronger language, with one MSP telling the Scottish Sun, he is an F with 4 asterisks R. It just reeks of arrogance. SNP councillor Jeremy Fernandez said that Mr Flynn should be allowed to run for Holyrood, but that he should stand down as an MP first. Mr Fernandez, who represents Elgin City North on Murray Council, said that it is 100% the right decision for the NEC to have blocked dual mandates in 2021, and that he hoped Mr Flynn's announcement would not put pressure on them to change their minds. He told The National, I think Stephen is an exceptional politician, and his place, the best place he can be used, is obviously at Holyrood. I think everyone within the party was expecting him to make a move. What wasn't expected is that he would make that move and then decide to try to stay in the UK Parliament in Westminster. It's a bit disappointing that he would make that move. We know in Murray that it simply doesn't work. We've had the case of Douglas Ross being an MP and an MSP for a few years, and during that time he was largely missing in action. He missed important votes. He missed meetings with the community. So I think it's quite disappointing that Stephen is thinking that he can do it. Joanna Cherry said that the rule brought in by the NEC for the 2021 elections was not election-specific, it was person-specific, a reference to the fact it was widely seen as intended to prevent her standing for Edinburgh Central. The former MP further predicted that it will be removed ahead of the 2026 elections. A front-page article written by Xander Elliots.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Q and Review and to tell your friends about our service.